The ocean stretched endlessly, its waves rolling in with a rhythm that seemed older than time itself. Claire Anderson stood at the edge of the boardwalk, her expensive sunglasses hiding the exhaustion etched deep into her eyes. She was the kind of woman who usually commanded rooms, a name whispered with respect in corporate circles across New York. But today, she was not the CEO of Anderson Technologies. Today, she was simply a mother, fragile, desperate, and lost. Her daughter, Emily, walked a few steps ahead, her small bare feet pressing lightly against the cool sand. 7 years old, porcelain skin kissed by the sunlight, hair the color of autumn chestnuts, and eyes that seemed far too old for her age. Emily didn't speak. She hadn't spoken since birth. Doctors called it selective mutism, combined with a rare neurological condition, but Claire had stopped listening to the medical jargon long ago. What mattered was that her daughter lived in silence. Claire adjusted the scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her mind heavy with guilt. She had taken Emily to therapists, specialists, private schools, anything money could buy. Yet, none of it had opened the door to her daughter's voice. And when her husband, Michael, finally decided he couldn't bear the burden, he walked out of their penthouse one rainy evening and never looked back. That was the breaking point. Now, with nothing but raw determination left, Claire had driven hours away from the city to bring Emily here to the beach she once visited as a child. Maybe the ocean could speak to her daughter in ways that people could not. But as Claire would soon discover, the ocean had its own plan. Claire Anderson was 36 years old, a woman of impeccable taste and ruthless efficiency. Her black suit jackets, pencil skirts, and towering heels were practically her armor. But here on the beach, she looked out of place in her linen blouse, rolled-up jeans, and sandals. Her phone, which constantly buzzed with updates from her company, was tucked deep in her tote bag, deliberately silenced. For once, she was determined not to be CEO Claire, but Mom Claire. Her daughter, Emily, moved with a curious hesitation. She crouched to pick up a shell, studied its curves, and tucked it into her pocket. She never once called out to her mother, never said, "Mom, look." Yet her silence carried weight, a silent plea that Claire longed to understand. While mother and daughter carved out their fragile bubble of existence, another pair entered the scene. Daniel Miller walked along the same stretch of sand, a backpack slung over one shoulder. His son, Ethan, ran ahead with the reckless joy of a 9-year-old boy, chasing seagulls and tossing a ball into the air. Daniel's broad frame moved with quiet strength, the kind that comes from years of military training. His face, weathered by both sun and sorrow, carried a calmness that people found either comforting or intimidating. He hadn't come to the beach looking for anyone. He had come here because it was the only place that made him feel close to his late wife. The ocean had taken her too soon, an accident on a stormy night when she was driving home from work. That loss had left a scar so deep he thought he'd never feel whole again. Yet Ethan needed him, and so Daniel had learned to keep going, one day at a time. The two families were strangers, their worlds seemingly unconnected. But fate often has a way of drawing broken people toward each other, stitching together new patterns in the fabric of life. The moment began with something as ordinary as a ball. Ethan's bright red ball slipped from his hands and bounced across the sand, rolling directly toward Emily. She froze, clutching the seashell tightly in her hand, eyes wide as the ball landed at her feet. Daniel jogged over, calling out, "Hey buddy, watch where you're—" He stopped short when he noticed the little girl standing there, staring at the ball but not making a sound. Claire stepped forward quickly, her protective instincts flaring. "It's fine," she said, her voice clipped, her body shielding Emily. Daniel bent slightly, offering a warm smile. "Sorry about that. My son tends to forget gravity exists when he's excited." Emily's eyes darted between him and the ball, but her lips stayed firmly sealed. Something in her expression tugged at Daniel's memory, the familiar blankness of someone who wanted to respond, but couldn't. He crouched lower, meeting Emily at eye level. Then, almost without thinking, he lifted his hands and signed slowly. "Are you okay?" For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Emily's eyes widened. her small chest rising and falling quickly. She blinked once, then tentatively raised her own hands. Her movements were hesitant, clumsy, but clear enough. Yes. Claire froze. She had seen her daughter use fragments of sign language before, mostly with therapists, but never with a stranger. Never with such sudden brightness in her eyes. Daniel smiled gently, signing back. That's good. My name is Daniel. Emily's lips curved into something rare, a smile so small it could have been missed. But to Claire, it was a miracle. She signed with trembling fingers. Emily. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, Claire Anderson felt like an outsider in her daughter's world. Claire's throat tightened, her perfectly rehearsed composure slipping. You know sign language? She asked, her voice sharper than intended. Daniel stood, brushing sand off his jeans. Yeah. My mom's deaf. I grew up speaking it. He looked down at Emily again, softer now. She's really good. Emily beamed, her tiny fingers already moving in another question. Claire couldn't keep up, her heart racing as she watched a stranger unlock doors she had been pounding on for years. A swirl of emotions hit her all at once. Gratitude. Confusion. Suspicion. Who was this man? Why did her daughter suddenly connect with him? And why, deep down, did it scare her as much as it comforted her? She tightened her grip on Emily's shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. We should keep walking. But Emily resisted. For the first time, she pulled slightly against her mother's guiding hand, her eyes locked on Daniel as if she had finally found someone who spoke her language. The waves lapped gently against the shoreline as Ethan bounded over, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Dad, did you see that seagull almost catch the ball? He exclaimed. Then stopped short when he noticed Emily standing close to his father. She clutched the shell in her hand, as if it were a secret treasure. Emily's gaze shifted nervously from Ethan to Daniel, then back to the ball lying near her toes. She nudged it forward with a tentative kick. The ball rolled clumsily back toward Ethan. And though she said nothing, her gesture was enough to light up the boy's face. Thanks, Ethan grinned, scooping it up. Without hesitation, he signed clumsily. Hi. His movements weren't perfect. Daniel had only taught him a few basics, but it was enough to make Emily's eyes widen again. Daniel caught the exchange, pride flickering in his chest. That's my son, Ethan, he explained, turning to Claire. He knows a little sign, but clearly not as much as your daughter. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She was too busy watching Emily. Her daughter's shoulders had relaxed, her small hands moving slowly as she signed back. Hello, Ethan beamed. She answered me. Dad. Emily let out a sound, not words, but a soft, breathy giggle that startled Claire more than anything else. It had been months since she'd heard that sound. Months since Emily had expressed pure joy. Claire pressed a hand against her chest, steadying herself. She wasn't sure whether to cry or to run. Daniel, sensing her unease, straightened and offered a careful smile. It's okay. Kids have a way of figuring each other out. But Claire wasn't convinced. The sun climbed higher, warming the sand, and still Emily lingered near Daniel and Ethan. For every step Claire tried to take forward, her daughter's feet rooted stubbornly in place. Emily, Claire murmured, kneeling slightly. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go build a sand castle. Just you and me. But Emily shook her head, her hands flashing quickly in signs Claire barely recognized. Play. With them. Claire swallowed hard. She hated this feeling, the sense of being left out, shut away from her own daughter's world. For years, she had shouldered the weight alone, fighting to bridge the silence. And now, in the span of minutes, a stranger had done what she could not. Daniel seemed to notice the storm in her expression. Look, he said gently. I don't mean to intrude. If you'd prefer, Ethan and I can. No. The word snapped sharper than Claire intended, her CEO tone cutting through the air. She saw Daniel blink in surprise. Quickly, she softened her voice. I mean, no. It's fine. She seems happy. It cost her something to admit it. Daniel gave a small nod, the kind of understanding look that carried no judgment. Happiness is rare enough these days. Let her have it. So they stayed. Ethan, brimming with energy, invited Emily to chase the tide with him. She hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who encouraged her with a small nod in sign. Go. Have fun. To Claire's astonishment, Emily took off running, her little feet kicking up sprays of sand as she followed Ethan down the beach. For the first time in so long, her laughter silent though it was echoed in her body language. Her hair streamed behind her like a banner of freedom. Claire found herself rooted beside Daniel, watching. She doesn't usually play like that, she admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on her daughter. Daniel folded his arms across his chest, his voice steady. Maybe she just needed someone who speaks her language. It's not always about words. The remark stung, not because it was unkind, but because it was true. Claire had thrown everything into therapy, speech specialists, alternative methods, all focused on teaching Emily to speak. She had never considered that perhaps her daughter didn't need to speak at all to be understood. Claire wrapped her arms tightly around herself. You make it sound so simple. Daniel's eyes softened. It's not simple. But it is possible. As the afternoon stretched on, the two families settled on the sand. Ethan and Emily busied themselves with building a crooked sandcastle, their hands covered in damp grains. Daniel and Claire sat nearby, the conversation between them hesitant at first, then gradually opening like a tide coming in. My mom's been deaf since birth, Daniel explained, pulling a blade of dune grass between his fingers. So sign language was my first language, in a way. My dad made sure I learned it fluently. Guess it stuck. Claire tilted her head. That explains why you're so natural with it. She responded to you instantly. Daniel glanced at Emily, who was shaping a tower beside Ethan. Kids know when someone understands them. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. His words cut deeper than he realized. Claire lowered her eyes, guilt tightening her throat. Had she been trying too hard in all the wrong ways? She cleared her throat. And your wife? Does she? Daniel's expression shifted, shadows crossing his face. He hesitated before answering. She passed away. 3 years ago. Car accident. Claire's breath caught. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. It's all right. His voice was quiet, but there was a strength in it. Loss is part of life. You don't get over it, but you learn to carry it differently. Silence settled between them, filled only by the sounds of the surf and the children's laughter. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice softer. My husband left when Emily's diagnosis became too much, I suppose. He said he wasn't strong enough to live with the silence. Daniel turned his head, studying her profile. Beneath the polished exterior, he saw the cracks, loneliness, anger, and a fierce kind of love holding her together. Then he didn't deserve either of you, Daniel said simply. The words hit her like a wave. No pity, no judgment, just truth. Claire blinked hard, staring at the horizon. She hadn't expected this stranger to see through her so easily. Part 7. A growing unease. As evening neared, the children's sandcastle grew taller, decorated with seashells and driftwood. Claire found herself laughing softly when Emily proudly patted the crooked tower, a grin lighting up her face. But even as her heart warmed, unease prickled at the edges of her mind. Who was this man, really? Why did her daughter attach to him so quickly? She turned to Daniel. You said you were in the military? Yeah. He nodded. Navy. Served 12 years before Ethan was born. Left when my wife and I decided it was time for stability. He offered a faint smile. Turns out, life had different plans. Claire studied him carefully, measuring every word. Years of corporate battles had made her cautious, always reading between the lines. And yet, she found nothing threatening in him, only quiet resilience. Still, the fear lingered. Fear of depending on someone again. Fear of watching Emily get attached, only to be abandoned. She stood abruptly, brushing sand from her jeans. It's getting late. We should head back. Emily's head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. She signed quickly. No. Stay. Play. Claire hesitated, torn between her instinct to protect and her daughter's first real request for freedom. Daniel caught the conflict in her eyes and said softly, "She just wants a little more time." For a long moment, Claire stood rigid. Then, finally, she exhaled, lowering herself back onto the sand. "Fine. A little longer." Emily's relief was visible in every motion as she turned back to Ethan, her hands flying with excitement. And Claire, despite herself, felt the first fragile crack forming in the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. The sky had shifted into streaks of pink and gold, the horizon blurring into an endless canvas. The beach was quieter now, with families packing up coolers and folding chairs. Seagulls circled overhead, crying against the wind. Claire sat stiffly on the sand, her arms wrapped protectively around her knees as she watched Emily and Ethan dart back and forth, their laughter a silent symphony she could not hear but could see. Every movement of Emily's hands, every spark of joy in her eyes, made Claire's chest ache. She wanted to be happy. She wanted to let her guard down. But the fear was always there, curling inside her like a shadow. Fear of what would happen if she trusted too much. Daniel sat beside her, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're still not sure about me." Claire's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" He shrugged lightly. "You've been watching me like you're waiting for me to slip up. Like I'm some kind of threat." She bristled. "I'm protecting my daughter. And you should," Daniel said evenly. "But protecting her doesn't mean cutting her off from the world." The words struck harder than he intended. Claire's jaw tightened. "You don't know what it's like to raise a child who can't—" She stopped herself, the rest of the sentence choking in her throat. Daniel's voice softened. "You're right. I don't know your exact struggle, but I do know what it's like to raise a child alone, to wonder every day if you're enough, to lie awake at night, thinking one mistake could break them forever." Claire turned her face away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She hated that his words touched something raw inside her. "I've been enough," she whispered, almost to herself. "I have to be." Daniel didn't argue. He simply let the silence sit between them, like the tide that rose and fell without demand. It happened quickly, the way most disasters do. Ethan spotted a cluster of shells farther down the beach and took off running, his ball bouncing against his hip. Emily, eager to follow, dashed after him without looking back. Claire had turned away for only a moment, fumbling for her phone in the tote bag to check the time. When she glanced back up, Emily was gone. Her heart seized. "Emily?" Her voice shot out sharp, slicing through the salty air. She scrambled to her feet, scanning the sand frantically. "Emily!" Daniel was already up, his instincts kicking in. He spotted Ethan in the distance, crouched near the waterline. But Emily wasn't beside him. She was just— Ethan looked up, confused, then pointed inland. "She went that way." Claire's stomach dropped. Inland meant dunes, thick patches of grass, and beyond that, roads. Panic surged through her veins like ice. "Emily!" Her voice cracked, raw with terror. She ran toward the dunes, her sandals slipping in the sand. Daniel sprinted past her with the precision of a man trained for emergencies. His sharp eyes scanned the terrain, his mind calculating possibilities. He remembered the way Emily had clutched the shell earlier. She might be following something shiny, something she thought was special. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, his voice steady, commanding, "Emily, stop where you are." No answer. Claire's chest heaved, her throat burning with helplessness. Every horrible scenario flooded her mind. Emily wandering into the road, falling into a ditch, disappearing forever. Then, just as despair clawed at her, Daniel spotted movement. A small figure, half hidden in the tall grass, crouched low, staring at something glittering in the sand. "Got her," Daniel muttered, pushing forward. He dropped to one knee beside the girl, his hands moving rapidly in sign. "You're safe. Come back." Emily startled, her wide eyes locking onto his. She hesitated. Clutching the object, she'd found a shard of sea glass, glowing green in the fading light. Daniel's voice softened. It's beautiful, Emily, but your mom is scared. Come on. Let's show her together. He extended his hand. Slowly, trembling, Emily slipped her small hand into his. When they emerged from the grass, Claire's knees nearly buckled. Relief crashed over her so violently she had to press a hand against her mouth. Emily! She rushed forward, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. Her body shook with adrenaline. Don't you ever do that again. Emily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, silent but trembling. Daniel stood nearby, his chest rising and falling as the last of his own panic faded. He didn't intrude. He simply waited, patient and steady, until Claire finally lifted her tear-streaked face toward him. You found her, she whispered. His eyes met hers. Of course I did. They walked back toward the beach slowly, Emily clinging tightly to her mother's hand while still holding Daniel's gift of safety in her memory. Ethan bounded over, relief plain on his face. What happened? He asked. She wandered off. Daniel answered calmly, ruffling his son's hair. But we've got her back. Claire sank onto the sand, pulling Emily into her lap. Her arms wrapped protectively around the girl, as if afraid she might vanish again. She couldn't stop shaking. Daniel lowered himself nearby, his voice low. You can't blame yourself. Kids are quick. Even the best parents can't catch everything. Claire let out a bitter laugh. Best parent? My husband left because he thought I wasn't enough. Maybe he was right. Daniel's expression hardened. No, he was a coward. A parent doesn't walk away because it's hard. A parent stays. And from where I'm sitting, you stayed. The words hit her like a bomb and a blow all at once. Her throat tightened, tears threatening again. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the surf filled the space between them. Finally, Claire whispered, Thank you. Daniel gave a simple nod. You don't have to thank me. You just have to keep fighting for her. And for the first time in years, Claire realized she wasn't fighting alone. Night draped itself over the shore like a velvet curtain, pricked with the first stars. A boardwalk cafe glowed warm behind broad windows, its chalkboard menu smudged with salt air. Daniel suggested they sit for a while to breathe, to reset, and Claire didn't argue. She felt fragile enough to shatter. Inside, the place hummed with quiet conversation and clinking china. A waitress with a silver wave tattoo on her wrist brought hot chocolate for the kids and coffee for the adults. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug, absorbing the heat as if it might melt whatever fear had calcified inside her bones. Ethan, still buzzing from the adrenaline of being helpful, aimed his smile like a lighthouse at everyone who looked their way. Claire kept one arm around her daughter, not trusting empty space. Her other hand shook when she lifted the coffee. She tried to hide it, but Daniel noticed anyway. He said nothing, only cupped his own mug as though anchoring both of them to the table. After a time, when the trembling waned and Emily's breathing steadied, Daniel lifted his hands and signed slowly. Are you okay? He didn't direct the question to Claire. He asked Emily first. Emily's small thumbs brushed her chest, scared. Then, after a pause, sorry. Claire swallowed. You don't need to be sorry, she murmured, voice frayed. She hesitated, then raised her hands, forming shapes she'd practiced 100 times, with tutors, and never quite believed in. Scared. Mom scared. The motion was clumsy, but it was hers. Emily turned, surprise parting her lips. The ice in her eyes cracked. She signed back slowly, coaching, Mom, okay, together. Claire blinked hard. The words weren't sounds, but they were everything. Daniel leaned back, giving them privacy inside the circle of their own language. He let time loosen its grip, let the cafe sounds blur to a soft hush. When he finally spoke, his voice lived somewhere between steady and kind. I know a counselor in town, he said. Her name's Helen. She grew up with deaf siblings and specializes in family communication. She runs a weekend class for parents and kids, no pressure, lots of games, lots of laughter. You might like it. He looked to Emily as he signed a summary of what he'd said. Emily's gaze flicked from him to her mother. She didn't cling the way she did an hour ago. Instead, she observed, curious, open. Claire tasted old pride and new humility. "We've done programs," she said softly, the CEO cadence gone. "Some good, some performative." Her eyes dipped to her daughter. "But if Emily wants to try..." Emily's fingers moved. "Try." She set her mug down carefully, as if deciding something delicate. Then she touched her chest. "Me." She tapped Claire's wrist. "Mom." She pointed to Daniel. "Friend." That word broke something sweet inside Claire. She glanced at Daniel, almost shy. "Friend," she echoed, as if testing it. He nodded once, accepting without pressing. The waitress returned with a paper listing community resources that Daniel had scribbled while they waited. The class, a Saturday meetup for signing families near the pier, a bookstore with a children's section and ASL videos, a library story hour led by a deaf storyteller. Claire realized he'd been doing this quietly, as if he'd known that when the fear ebbed, the real work would begin. "Thank you," she said, and the words had weight. They walked out into the night with the sea breathing in the dark, the boardwalk planks creaking underfoot. A busker strummed a guitar under a lamppost, voice low and rough. Ethan trotted ahead, and Emily followed at a calmer pace, her fingers catching the moonlight as she signed something small to herself, practicing shapes she wanted to remember. At the car, Claire crouched to Emily's level. "We'll come back tomorrow," she said, careful, firm, a promise. She signed it too. Not perfectly, but with intention. "Tomorrow, back." Emily's face opened like a flower at dawn. Daniel and Ethan lingered a few paces away. It felt odd to say goodbye to people who had, in a single day, stepped into the empty places no one else could reach. "Thank you for today," Claire said to Daniel. "I don't know how to repay." "You don't," he interrupted gently. "Just keep letting her be understood." A smile ghosted his mouth. "And come to pancakes." "Pancakes?" Ethan perked up. "Tomorrow, after the beach." He nodded vigorously at Emily and signed pancakes with the exuberance of a kid who doesn't worry about dignity. Emily's hands fluttered. A giggle, a real one, shook her shoulders. She mirrored the sign, then added chocolate with exaggerated precision. Ethan's eyes went wide. "Deal." Daniel lifted a hand in farewell. "See you in the morning." Claire got behind the wheel and sat for one extra minute, hands resting on the leather, breathing the sea into her lungs. When she pulled away, Emily reached across the console, finding her mother's fingers. Claire held on. They made a ritual of it, as if rituals were scaffolding for a life. Morning ocean. Pancakes, yes. Chocolate. Sometimes strawberries. The weekend class with Helen, who greeted them with fluent hands and an irreverent humor that cut through discomfort. Games that made even Claire laugh, relay races that required signing verbs, picture books retold with expressive faces, charades that demanded big feelings. Ethan attended, too, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to be part of Emily's world. Daniel didn't hover, but he was there. Sometimes at the back, arms crossed, watching the edges for trouble habits of a sailor who knew currents change. Sometimes kneeling beside a kid who missed a sign and felt small about it. Sometimes translating the coffee shop chaos into calm for a parent who had never been asked what they needed. Claire found that he unnerved her less when she learned his rhythms, the way he grew quiet when conversation turned to grief, the way he moved closer not to fix, but to witness when someone else's sorrow surfaced. She learned that he repaired boat engines on a dock behind the marina, that he cooked on Sundays and always burned the first pancake because he set the heat too high, that he kept books of poetry on his nightstand, even if he claimed not to understand them. She learned he did not rescue her, which is what made it safe to be near him. Emily learned faster than any adult expected. Not that she suddenly spoke with her voice, but that she began to speak with her self-expressive, quick-witted, mischievous. She told jokes in sign, and when Claire missed the timing, she would perform it again, slower, exuberant, until her mother caught up and laughed in the exact right place. She learned how to say no firmly, and how to say I'm sad without vanishing, and how to point at the horizon and sign home, because sometimes the ocean felt like that. On a Tuesday evening, after a day of video calls and a spreadsheet that refused to balance, Claire drove to the bookstore Daniel had mentioned. It was small, the kind of place where the aisles ran too close, and you had to turn sideways to pass a stranger. A display of children's ASL storybooks sat near a chalkboard that read Hands Talk. Eyes Listen. Emily ran her fingers along the spines, the way some people read Braille, as if the colors themselves told stories. She chose a book about a fox who lost his voice and found it again in his hands. Claire bought it without checking the price, and that, too, felt like healing. They read it that night on the couch. Emily narrated in sign, expressive brows dancing. The foxes speaking, built from shape and light. Claire signed the words she recognized and asked about the ones she didn't. Her hands clumsy, her pride quieter than before. When the fox told his mother, "I love you," in a last panel flourish, Emily glanced sideways, conspiratorial, and signed the phrase quick, almost shy. Then she did it again, deliberate. Clear one hand to her chest, the other at an angle, twisting out. Claire's breath hitched. She signed it back, slowly, reverently. They slept with the book on the coffee table like a new lighthouse. Summer slid forward. A Thursday thunderstorm rolled in and sent everyone under the pier, where Ethan declared their sandcastle a fortress, and Emily appointed herself keeper of keys, which were in fact shells with holes in them. Daniel taught them both storm and safe, and waited out. He showed Claire the sign for stubborn, and then added one eyebrow with such exactness that she burst out laughing, and signed it right back at him. Michael called once. His name on the screen was a bruise Claire no longer pressed. She let it ring out. That night, when Emily slept, she told Daniel the truth. She hadn't said aloud. I kept asking her to try to speak for him, to try harder. I told myself I was encouraging her, but I think I was bargaining. She rubbed a palm over her eyes. I'm done bargaining with what is. Daniel only nodded. He didn't offer absolution. He knew better than to treat adulthood like a courtroom. He poured tea and handed it to her, and let the steam say what neither of them could. When the storm passed, the sky rinsed so clean the world felt new. The end of summer arrived with a festival on the boardwalk, paper lanterns, a carousel that squealed, vendors selling corn and neon bracelets. A small stage went up near the railing, and Helen's community group families who signed received a 10-minute slot to tell a story together. Not a performance, a sharing. Helen insisted on that boundary. Emily had been part of the planning, which meant that somewhere in the mix of lanterns and popcorn and fiddling microphones, a 7-year-old girl dressed in a yellow sundress would step up to sign one page of a story about a fox in a voice that lived in the hands. Only if you want to, Claire had said, again and again. Want, Emily signed. Firm. The evening thrummed. Daniel threaded through the crowd with bottled water for everyone, the beautiful and ridiculous pack mule energy of a dad who didn't realize he was beloved for it. Ethan guarded the stage as if it were an aircraft carrier. Claire paced, not because she doubted her daughter, but because exhilaration looks exactly like anxiety when it's wearing a mother's heart. When their turn came, the group arranged themselves with the ease of people who have shared benches and backyards. Helen introduced them, voice and hands moving in tandem. The story unfolded across a circle of bodies, adults and kids, fluent and new. It was less performance than conversation, less recitation than a quilt. Every patch visible. Emily stood when it was her turn. The lanterns painted warm light down her arms. She glanced once at Daniel. He lifted 2 fingers. You've got it. She glanced at Ethan. He struck a silly, serious pose that made her suppress a grin. Then she found her mother. The world pin-dropped. Emily signed the fox's line. I am here. I am not broken. My voice lives where you can see it. Her hands arced the words with such clarity that some people in the crowd, strangers, nodded. She finished with the smallest motion, a shape like a door opening. Claire didn't clap. Not because she wasn't proud, but because her hands were already speaking. Proud, brave, beautiful. Her face did the rest. When the moment ended, the applause came the group, the crowd, the buskers who paused mid-chord. Emily climbed down and walked straight to her mother. Claire knelt, forgetting the nice dress, the world. Emily signed something new, something she must have practiced in secret, because the timing was perfect. "Thank you for learning my voice." Claire's eyes flooded. She answered with something she had practiced too. "Thank you for teaching me." Daniel and Ethan hung back, letting the orbit hold. Then Ethan, incapable of not orbiting anything joyful, bounded in with 2 corn dogs and declared a summit. "I come bearing offerings," he announced, and Emily laughed so hard she almost dropped hers. They did the carousel next, because you cannot not ride a carousel when the universe hands you one. Daniel leaned against the rail as Claire and Emily circled past. Their hair wind-tangled, and their eyes ignited. On the 3rd rotation, Claire reached out and squeezed his hand where it rested on the bar. It was so quick a person could have missed it. No one did. Later, after the lanterns dimmed and the boardwalk thinned, the 4 of them walked down to the water one last time. The ocean breathed its old breath, steady and endless. The air smelled like salt and sugar and rain that hadn't fallen yet. "I keep thinking about the first day," Claire said, voice low. "How I wanted to pull her away. How I was afraid of what it meant. To need help. Needing help is just the other angle of loving someone," Daniel said. "You can't do either one alone for very long." She turned to him. "And you? Do you ever let someone help you?" He gave a wry little smile that lived mostly in his eyes. "Not on purpose." Then, quieter. "Sometimes, the ocean sneaks people in." They were silent a while. Ethan skipped stones and taught Emily the mechanics. The wrist flick. The skim. She tried and failed. And tried again. More laughter. More light. When they walked back toward the parking lot, Emily tugged on Claire's sleeve and signed one more thing. She looked at Daniel and then at her mother. Mischief glow on her face. She planted her feet, and, with every ounce of drama a 7-year-old can muster, signed something she'd learned in class last week. She looked between them as she did it, eyebrows up, asking permission either to be outrageous or to be right. "Family," she signed, forming the circle at her chest and opening it outward to encompass them all. "Maybe." She added the wiggle for maybe, and then, with a tiny shrug, repeated family. The second time, she didn't wiggle. Ethan gasped, delighted. "That's legally binding." He whispered to no one. Claire laughed through tears. She looked at Daniel, then at her daughter, then back at the night. She didn't answer with a vow. She answered with the only thing that wouldn't make a liar of tomorrow. Yes, not forever, not a promise they might be too fragile to carry. But yes to this, to now, to the way healing unfolds if you keep making room for it. They reached the cars. The goodbye was easy, which is its own miracle. "See you Saturday," Daniel said. "Saturday?" Claire agreed. "Pancakes." "Chocolate," Ethan insisted. "Strawberries," Emily countered, finding the sign on her own. Ethan pretended to faint. They drove away under a ligature of stars. In the rear view, the ocean kept breathing. Autumn began somewhere else, and then slipped unnoticed into this town. School routines unfurled. Work resumed its pacing. Growth didn't stop, because the calendar did what calendars do. The beach cooled. The coffee shop changed its menu board to announce cider. The bookstore put scarves on its wooden fox. Emily's signing bloomed. She became opinionated about everything: the shape of the clouds, the smell of the sea, the exact number of chocolate chips a pancake must contain to be ethically considered a pancake. She corrected Ethan's sloppy verbs with a sternness that would have made a judge proud. He responded by draping himself across chairs and feigning death, until she relented. Claire's hands found fluency, not in speed but in grace. She learned to speak less and mean more, to catch the grammar that lived in eyebrows and mouth shapes, to hold silence like a living thing, not as a lack, but as a presence. At work, people noticed something indefinable. The way she listened, the way she now asked questions that turned meetings into rooms where ideas could breathe. One evening, after the class, Helen stopped Claire at the door. "There's a moment, with parents," she said, "where I can see the shift. You had it tonight." "Did I?" Claire asked, startled. "You stopped trying to translate her into your language," Helen said fondly. "And you started translating yourself into hers." Claire thought of that the whole drive home. Later, when Emily fell asleep hugging a plush fox, Claire texted Daniel a picture of a pancake with exactly 7 chocolate chips and wrote, "Ethically compliant." He responded with a blurry photo of Ethan grinning and a caption, "Union pleased." The thread didn't stop. That, too, was a kind of vow. On the first cold night, when their breath showed up white and honest, the 4 of them returned to the beach. No festival now. Just dark water and a moon so bright it turned the sand to bone china. They brought a blanket and thermoses and a lopsided kite that had no business flying in the near-still air. The kite tumbled and stumbled and finally rose a little anyway, as if encouraged by attention alone. "Remember the first day?" Claire said, smiling into her scarf. "I thought I had to hold everything together so tight." "You did," Daniel said, "until you didn't." "And you?" she asked. He exhaled for a long time. "I thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel the parts that stopped." He glanced at Ethan, who was trying to sign Meteor with frankly absurd dramatics. Turns out stillness can be a kind of movement. They let the kite go just a little, just enough. Emily tugged on Claire's sleeve again. She stood, face lunar, hands waiting in the pool of light between them. Slowly, solemnly, she signed, "I love you, Mom." No rush, no flourish, just truth passing from small hands into a space big enough to hold it. Claire's reply wasn't polished. She fumbled the first shape and restarted, laughing at herself, which made Emily's grin bloom brighter. Then she got it right. "I love you too." The air around them shifted, as if the night itself rearranged to make room. Emily turned to Daniel, set her palms like a door opening. "Thank you." Then, carefully, she must have asked Helen for this one. "Thank you for seeing me." Daniel's eyes shone. He touched his chest, then lifted his hand out. "Always." He didn't add anything to it. And that was the point. They stayed until their toes went numb. Then they packed up, parceled the night into the car, and headed back toward town where windows glowed. And the world, improbably, kept spinning. At the stoplight, where the street split into 2 directions, one toward Daniel's marina, one toward Claire's quiet street, they idled side by side. The light held red. The pause felt like a chapter break. Claire glanced across the small canyon of space between cars. Daniel looked back. Neither waved. They didn't need to. The light changed. They turned in the same direction. And somewhere behind them, in the dark that wasn't empty, the ocean kept speaking the oldest language anyone has ever known. "Come back. Come back. Come back."